My name's Alan Ventris and I'm the Associate Director of State Records. State Records has a vast collection of archives relating to the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Among these archives, the highlight of our collection is a series of approximately 3,000 black and white photographs which are available through State Records' website, which is www.records.nsw.gov.au. The bridge itself was one of the greatest engineering feats ever undertaken in Australia. In the 1930s, it could be said that it was one of the greatest engineering feats of the world. The bridge at the time was thought to be massively over-engineered and far, far too big. It really took until the 1960s and 1970s before the 8-lane highway to reach anywhere near capacity. And really I think this is a tribute to the foresight of John Bradfield, the designer of the bridge, and who the Bradfield Highway is named after. Bradfield was a remarkable man who had a great vision for transport in Sydney, and it's rather regrettable that governments in the early years of the 20th century really didn't take any notice of his ability to look into the future. He was the designer of the Circle Line in Sydney, and he also had plans for a Northern Beaches line going all the way up to Narrabeen, as well as the famous Eastern Suburbs Railway, which Bradfield had the vision that it would swing right round through where the present University of New South Wales is and on through to Kingsford and then link up with the Southern Line. It really is a shame that Bradfield's vision wasn't fulfilled. In the 1930s, the bridge in Sydney became known as the Iron Lung because it actually provided employment for so many men and put bread on the table for their families. The 1930s were a terrible time economically in Australia and around the world because of the Great Depression, and the bridge did provide a form of economic relief. This was primarily because of the Premier Jack Lang had refused to buckle to British and Commonwealth government pressure to rein in expenditure, and he continued to spend quite heavily on this large infrastructure project, despite the fact that money really wasn't coming into the state coffers, and he had arranged for a number of loans directly from overseas through the New South Wales government rather than going through the Commonwealth government. And the Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons, and Lang didn't see eye to eye at all. The bridge construction took 8 years, and it was quite a dangerous job for the men involved. They didn't have the occupational health and safety legislation that we have today, and certainly things like harnesses were quite unknown, and during the construction 16 men died, which is quite remarkable given the nature of the work that they were doing. One of the most difficult jobs that the men had to perform was the riveting job, which meant that they had to handle individually white-hot rivets which were thrown between a furnace, the man who was actually putting the rivets in, and they had leather and steel mesh gloves to capture the rivets in their hands and then push them into place. And this was obviously a very, very dangerous occupation, given the fact that they were, maybe 150 metres above the water of Sydney Harbour. One of the interesting things about the construction of the bridge are the four granite pylons north and south of the bridge, and these were faced with Moruya granite, and essentially they provide no practical purpose. They're not there to support anything of the bridge, and they were included purely for aesthetic reasons. Bradfield realised this, and although the construction of the pylons added considerably to the overall cost of the bridge, he insisted on their inclusion for a couple of reasons, and obviously the main reason being aesthetic, but also it did provide employment for many, many men and supported their families. The quarries down at Moruya, a whole town grew up around the quarries during the construction of the bridge, and many families came over from Scotland because there weren't enough stonemasons in Australia at the time, so these Scottish stonemasons were imported to provide the technical expertise to construct the pylons. Possibly one of the most famous stories relating to the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge is the slashing of the ribbon by the new Guard member Francis de Groot. De Groot was an unusual man who was very much on the right wing of politics. By trade he was a furniture designer and restorer, and in fact he should be more remembered for his furniture design than for his slashing of the ribbon on the Harbour Bridge. However, on the day of the bridge opening, which was the 19th of March 1932, de Groot observed a number of New South Wales Lancers coming out of Government House in Macquarie Street, and he managed to tag along behind them, and naturally the police and everybody in the crowd thought that he was part of the official party. So they trotted down Macquarie Street and then across towards the bridge with de Groot hanging behind the New South Wales Lancers. When they got to the bridge, de Groot placed himself near one of the cameramen and waited for the opportune moment when Jack Lang was going to cut the ribbon. And at that moment he spurred his horse forward and tried to slash the ribbon with his sword. Unfortunately for de Groot, either the sword wasn't sharp enough or the ribbon wasn't tight enough, because the first slash he failed to cut the ribbon, so he had to turn the sword around and pull it upwards to cut the ribbon. The ribbon was cut, and at this point he was dragged from his horse by the New South Wales police and arrested and taken away. The ribbon itself was retied, and subsequently, not long afterwards, Jack Lang did the honours and opened the bridge. De Groot himself was kept in custody overnight and charged and subsequently fined £5. In his later life, actually went back to Ireland, where he'd come from, where he died in about 1968. State Records was involved with the Historic Houses Trust in the exhibition Bridging Sydney, and the book Bridging Sydney, edited by Caroline Mackinnis and published by the Historic Houses Trust of New South Wales, is available for sale. For further information about the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you can consult State Records website, www.records.nsw.gov.au, or you can look at one of our archives in brief, which covers the archives relating to the Sydney Harbour Bridge held at State Records.